Hello and welcome to another Hand Drink Solo wine info video where we review curious wines for curious minds. Today I want to talk about a little concept in the wine world called winemakers' intention. And this is something that many modern wine writers and critics completely ignore on purpose, it would seem, although more old school wine critics would assert that it's almost impossible to do any sort of meaningful wine drinking without actually having access to the winemaker's intention. What was the winemaker trying to achieve? What element did he want to magnify? What style was he making the wine in? After all, how can you critique something if you have no idea what the person was trying to do in the first place? Now, there is a far simpler way of expressing the idea of winemaker's intention, and that is to use the term mindset, which is also a lot less wine wanky than the other version. And so to illustrate just what a great effect a shift in mindset can have, I'm going to take you to 1987, the world of basketball sneakers. Michael Jordan had entered into a sneaker deal with Nike, and the Air Jordan 1 and Air Jordans 2 had both been designed and released to market, and it was selling fairly well. There was only one problem. Michael didn't really like the shoes, and he liked the Nike team even less. In fact, he was on the verge of leaving Nike and the deal completely. So in a panic, Nike did something a little unusual. And that was, instead of hiring another sneaker designer, they asked this architect, Tinker Hatfield, to design the sneaker instead. And the fact that he wasn't a sneaker guy meant that he had a whole bunch of different questions and different challenges to solve that a sneaker guy wouldn't have even thought of. Tinker asked himself, well, how do human beings actually move inside their shoe? And what does ventilation look like for a shoe? And how do you make a human feel free while they're inside a shoe? Now, these rather different sets of questions, this rather different mindset, led to the launch of the Air Jordan 3, which went on to become one of the most iconic sneakers of all time. And it's this idea that a shift in mindset can reveal a completely different result with the same raw materials. That is what I want to illustrate today through our wine of the day, which is the Thelema Vineyards Estate Merlot. And it's made with fruit from the really high-lying vineyards in Helswigte that are on Thelema Vineyards property, all put together by winemaker Rudi Schultz. Now, if you have even the slightest wine geek inclination, you'll be able to see this shift in mindset very clearly by just taking a quick glance at Thelema Vineyards' technical specs for this wine. Because the Thelema winemaking team are absolutely meticulous when it comes to recording things like pruning type and yield per hectare and soil type and altitude and aspect and clones and fermentation temperatures in the cellar. And when it comes to the fermentation temperatures of this particular Merlot, we'll notice that they were quite low. In fact, this little temperature range was far closer to what you might expect if you were making a Pinot Noir. Now, this slightly different fermentation temperature bracket has a whole cascade of implications that goes into what the wine smells like, what it looks like in the glass, what the tannins feel like in your mouth, and what the overall impression of the wine is. It's amazing what a winemaker can unlock or suppress simply by shifting the temperature of his ferments by a few degrees. But rather than have me tumble down the rabbit hole, dragging you with me, going into all the details and implications of these changes in temperature, I thought it would be a lot simpler, a far more elegant solution perhaps, to have winemaker Rudi Schultz share these ideas himself.
All our red and white fermenters are equipped with cooling, and we've got an automated system where we dial in the minimum or the maximum temperature we want to operate and go for those higher fermentation temperatures. Yes, you do get more extraction of not just color, you'll get higher extraction of tannins and phenolics as well. But we're quite happy with what we get in color-wise. We don't crush our fruit at all. Comes off the table whole berry, and then it goes into a holding tank where we chill it. We do a pre-fermentation cold soak. And then we're allowed to pick up temperature on its own. So a very long delayed start to fermentation. And I will actually use it around before alcoholic fermentation starts. So you get some extraction then already. We've actually moved away from 2 pump overs a day with tradition that we used to do because we were getting these really big extracted bold Merlots, and stylistically we didn't like it. We're just doing 1 pump over a day now. So it's a nice long aerated pump over. We use it like the Venturi inline. So it's a massive amount of oxygen gets put in, always moving the whole volume of the tank. We're still getting the same kind of extract, but with much softer expression. All our Merlot will get treated exactly the same way. Even what often may be regarded as an inferior parcel, the portions at the bottom of the hills or the greener patches within a vineyard, gets the same treatment as the component that will ultimately become Merlot Reserve. But we're clearly big fans of Alchemy 4. It's actually a blend of yeasts that have been compiled into one package in collaboration with the WRI from Australia. It's a high ester producing yeast, and it really pumps that red fruit, dark fruit, and it also masks the methoxypyrazine, so the green components, and you get it in Cabernet. And then there's that beta-damascenone, which is essentially violets, but it accentuates that as well. But to come to the X-Pure specifically because it masks green nodes, methoxypyrazine. So obviously, our vineyards, we got a lot of steep slopes, and your bottom part of the vineyard ripens quite a bit later than the rest of the farm or the rest of that block because it's cooler down there, more water's down there, it's more vigorous. So that often gets picked later. And to kind of combat the possibility of any slightly greener characteristics in that fruit, we use that X-Pure, which if there is any methoxypyrazine or green notes, it covers that over. You don't notice it at all.
So now you've heard what Rudi was trying to achieve and how he achieved it, what his intention was. Let's actually get into the glass, and then we can critique what we find there. When we get into the glass and give this guy a sniff, well, this is one of those wines you really want to give a nice, long, uninterrupted sniff rather than a couple of panicky breaths. You'd be amazed at how much the aromas that are presented to you change from the beginning of that breath to the end. And pay attention to how it changes as you breathe in, as your breathing slows towards the end. It really is quite illuminating as opposed to, as I say, having a whole bunch of short little sniffs. Now, what you get when you do that is, in fact, probably a whole lot of the really classic notes that you would get from a book like Wine Folly, I guess, the kind of classic textbook idea of Merlot, a mix of herbs, a little bit of cocoa, a little bit of perhaps mineral terracotta, some red cherries, a bit of spice. And yet, for all the notes that might be exactly like a textbook Merlot, this is one of the most un-Merlotish wines I've had in a long time. Sure, it has those Mediterranean herbs, it has a bit of thyme, a bit of oreganum, but then there's also a far more beautifully lifted floral element, some lavender, perhaps a touch of violets as well. That may have something to do with that X-Pure yeast that we talked about earlier. And then there's one extra special element, which I always love on some slightly lighter reds, and that's the fact that the aromas here are so fresh, they almost tip over into a kind of blood orange type explosive citrus fest, which really is always lovely when it pops up. And of course, there are, the more traditional cherries, a touch of really aromatic raspberry, but it's those other elements, those floral notes and the touch of citrus and the fact that there is no more serious, broody, beefy, gamey notes or marmite notes and black plum. This is a different affair. Despite, as I said, having herbs and berries and a touch of oak spice, it's very different. But I think to really appreciate how different it is in style, one needs to take a sip. Now, what's not surprising is that all those elements we smelt on the nose are there on the palate. What is surprising is just how lithe and supple this wine is. And again, it shouldn't be a surprise by now that it is far more like a Pinot Noir in style. The tannins are silky and supple and lithe. The wine is enormously aromatic, and the fruit is just so juicy and fresh and clearly articulated. Perhaps I think one of the most important achievements of this wine is that it manages to take those classic Merlot notes and completely reinterpret them into something that just is a gymnastic light show, if that's even a thing. And partially, I think this is why it's such an important wine, because it reminds people, A, that Merlot is incredibly versatile and approachable, but can also be elegant and light-footed without being trivial. It kind of reminds us why Merlot is the most planted cultivar in the world today. I guess it should be noted that we are drinking this 4 years from harvest, so those tannins perhaps have softened up a little bit. Man, the tension is still there. The vibrance of the fruit is still there. It really is a beautifully articulate wine where the tannins are just silky and soft and beautifully woven together. The bottle is poetic, some might say. And perhaps you might think to yourself that calling a wine poetic is what happens when you finish the bottle. But this really is my first glass of the evening, though it won't be my last. And perhaps my final thought is that some people come to a Merlot with the mindset of the fact that Merlot either needs to be this massive icon style wine with plum and savory notes and big structure and round fruit, or it's going to be light, short, slightly sour, lacking any power. And this shows that it doesn't have to be big icon style, but can still be enormously serious and engaging. Again, I think this is one of the more important Merlots in South Africa because of how successfully it reinterprets the genre. A little homework exercise for you at home would be to take this Merlot and the Reserve Merlot and drink them alongside one another and let me know your thoughts. Now, while you pour yourself another glass of this, as you undoubtedly will, I'm going to leave you links to 2 more videos. Both of them will talk about more wines made by winemaker Rudi Schultz using fruit from either Thelema Estates in Stellenbosch or their sister estate Sutherland, which has all its vineyards in the wine region of Elgin. Until next time, stay curious and always drink niche.